Um, I guess you've all heard about 3.5 and know what 3.5 is. But just in case there's anybody on this call who doesn't know, just very briefly, it's under the theory of social change, if you can activate 3.5% of the population, you can force transformative change. Force is perhaps the wrong word, but institute transformative change. And this is based on studies of the civil rights movement, etc. And it's been used as a template by many groups across many decades. We have talked to the Bernie Sanders campaign, particularly to Becky Bond, about what they did in America, because they used much the same approach as some of the other civil rights and civil disobedience campaigns, very, very successfully, as we know from the Bernie Sanders campaign. So it's basically really, really simple. It is about a lot of it is about the first stage. So you've got a choice of leafleting, having stalls, or door knocking, and door knocking is the key, I believe, to achieving a significant response from the people that you talk to. And I also know that it's an area where a lot of rebels have quite a bit of reluctance to get involved in. So it's a really interesting area, and I know people are nervous about it, as I was when I began. I'm not nervous about it anymore, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So I just want to run through the stages first. So it's like a three-stage process. First stage is door knocking. At the end of that door knocking, it's the invitation to a talk. And that talk is called the Look Up, Step Up talk. And it's like a new formulation of the old Heading for Extinction talk. And then the third stage in the process is about signing up new recruits and integrating them into the XR family. And then repeating the process and repeating the process. And the idea is that, of course, the more people we have to start it, the more people we'll have at the end. And of course, if it works exponentially. So you start with a dozen people, they bring in 6 people each. You end up with 72 people, they bring in 6 people each. You have whatever 6 times 72 is, 150 or something. Or to whatever, 350, and so you go on, and you build this mass movement. The key for me is what happens at the beginning. It's like, how do we ensure that we have the best approach? And there are a number of different approaches that have been used. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone off. Forgotten I had it on, in case somebody calls me. There are different approaches to door knocking. And the traditional approach, of course, is knocking on the door, asking people if they like XR and trying to persuade them to join. This is completely not the approach that we have used in Cornwall. It's also not the approach that's been used in Exeter, and it's not the approach we're using in London. And I've used those 3 specific examples because you've got 3 different demographics. So you've got a rural area in Cornwall, you've got a city like Exeter, which is like a rural city, but still a city. And then in London, we went to Hackney and did an estate in Hackney. So we've got inner city, multi-ethnic estate. So we've got 3 very different demographics at work here. When I started with 3.5 back in January, I thought I need to get out of my comfort zone and go and knock on some doors and see what happens. But I can't just do it because it's not going to work. I need to have a system. And the system was, let's do it like we're doing a local survey. So we go and knock on the door, say, hi, I'm Oliver, I live locally. We're doing a local survey about the climate crisis. could I ask you a few questions? And I was really surprised at how many people said yes. Probably only 40% of people actually answered the doors, maybe even less, maybe 30%. But of those who did, nearly all of them were prepared to talk. Some of them were prepared to talk quite a lot. In fact, some of them were prepared to talk quite a lot more than I wanted to talk to them. But it was a small, what is considered nationally to be a small village, 400, no, let's just think, trying to think the number of houses. It was about 450 houses and a population of about 1,000. And when we came to doing the talk, there were 26 people who turned up for the talk. Some of them were existing rebels who'd come out of the woodwork, because as we know, lots of us disappeared during COVID, and some of them were new. And I was so surprised by that, because we were expected to have 2 or 3 and end up going down the pub, but we didn't. We had 26, and we thought this is a fantastic response. Let's try another approach. So the next approach we used was leafleting, and we leafleted the next village, which was a population of 3,000, so 3 times the size, 1,600 houses. We leafleted every single house. We didn't knock on any doors, and 2 people turned up. And that for us was a real object lesson. So at the time, because I'd just become a local group supporter, I was covering Cornwall and Devon, and there are quite a few local groups. We're talking about maybe 12 local groups altogether. One of them was in Exeter, and the rebel who was running the local group was a fan of the door knocking local survey approach. And when I spoke to him, he had already, this is probably at the beginning of February, he had already recruited about 100 rebels. He'd recruited them on the door, not at the talk. He'd been recruiting them on the door. So I had lots of long conversations with him, and also watched some videos about what's been going on abroad and the different approaches being used in different places. And there's one particularly good one about a local survey approach in Canada, which was carried out on the active listening process. So it was actually removing yourself completely as a rebel, or as a rebel with views. So you're simply seeking the views of the householder. And so we put together a local survey with 5 questions, 3 of which were part of the active listening part, and then 2 were not. And when we went to London during the rebellion, we were allocated from Cornwall and Devon, we were allocated to Hackney, and went to Hackney and was sent out to door knock on a working class multi-ethnic estate in Hackney. And you only need to look at me or hear my voice to know that I'm not the sort of person who lives on a multi-ethnic housing estate in Hackney. So it was really interesting for me to find out what was going to happen. And I have to admit to being quite nervous about doing it, and knocked on the first door, and within 3 minutes had signed up a recruit. And I could not believe the impact. 2 of us, one of us from Falmouth, and myself, we door knocked for 3 hours with 2 other local rebels, so 4 of us all together. We signed up 19 rebels in 3 hours. And the talk, the 3.5 talk, the Look Up, Step Up talk, which was after the rebellion, it was the following Tuesday after the rebellion, they signed up, I'm not quite sure of the number, but it was somewhere around 10 or 12 more at that talk. So it was a really, really successful, for me, a really successful means of approach. And what I particularly liked about this was the fact that we were doing active listening. Although we went with a badge on us, which said, you know, our XR badge, we were quite specifically not putting forward any suggestion of either agreement or disagreement with anything that was said. The whole point is to hear what they've got to say to us. And if I've got, oh, I have got time, I'm good time. So I'd just like to go through the questions with you. Is that okay? Yeah. So okay. So the first, I'm going to just share my own screen, just so I make sure I read the questions to you correctly. So the introduction is, hi, my name's Oliver. I live locally. Of course, we couldn't do this in London. I couldn't do it in London, but normally it's, hi, my name's Oliver. I live locally. And the reason we say that is because that immediately makes a contact, a link with the person you're talking to. So, hi, my name's Oliver. I belong to a local climate action group. So don't specify who you are. And we're carrying out a survey of your neighborhood to find out how people feel about the climate crisis. May I ask you a couple of questions? It won't take a minute. So that's the first question. I mean, sometimes, of course, people on the door will, well, actually quite often, when you say, you know, may I ask you a couple of questions? They say, well, I haven't got long, or I got to put the children to bed, or I'm cooking supper, or whatever it is. So you just say, may I just ask, it's just a quick question. If they don't want to answer all the questions, you can just say, just let me ask you one question. And that one question is, can you tell me how serious you feel the climate crisis is on a scale of 1 to 5, if 5 is the most serious? And of course, as soon as you've done that, you've then engaged them, and you can then draw out from them more information about what they feel, because most people have got a view of the climate crisis. And I mean, I was amazed, especially in London, that I thought I would say probably 90% of the people we spoke to knew about the climate crisis. They might not know about it in detail, but they know about it. And it's, for a lot of them, it's pretty terrifying. So a lot of them will answer 4 or 5. So serious or very serious. And that enables you to say, that's really interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more? I'd really like to know a little bit more about why you think it's so serious. So that's the first question. And let them talk. We let them talk as much as they wanted to on that. Often they didn't have a lot to say, but that enables you to go on to the next question. And the next question, which is one of my favorites, is how well do you think governments are doing in tackling the climate crisis? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very confident. And it was not surprising, really, that the answers to that question tended to be 1s and 2s, sometimes -2, and once -10. So people were not. So, I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. The thing is that because you're doing active listening, you can't say, oh, that's great, I completely agree with you, even if you feel it, of course. You've just got to say, that's really interesting. Can you tell me why you think, or tell me a little bit more about what you think about how the government's doing and why you have this view? And quite often, of course, that will lead them into talking about other things. So they'll say, you know, the government, well, it's bloody rubbish about, it's rubbish about the cost of living, it's rubbish about oil, it's rubbish about, you know, so you immediately introduce all sorts of different subjects. And that's worth storing, because you might want to come back to that a little bit later on. So the third question is about us. So the third question is to say, I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, and name the local group, whatever the local group is. So have you heard of us? And may I ask you what you think of us, again, on a 1 to 5 scale? 5 being fully supporting us. And I've always added to that, please be honest with us. Please tell us the truth. We need to hear the truth from you. Or we need you to be honest with us, because you've identified yourself at this stage, it can very easily put up barriers. But because you've already had the discussion about the government and about the climate crisis, actually people by this time have relaxed quite a bit and will be quite kind of willing to talk. And often, quite often they'll say things like, I don't like all this sitting in the road, or, you don't let ambulances through, or, all the stuff that we know people say. But they'll also say that I think what you're trying to do is really important. And that was a real revelation to me. And I'd just like to say, I know it's a little bit of a digression, but I'd just like to say one of the key things for me about this whole process was that, that we're told by the right-wing press all the time how much everybody hates us. Well, they don't, actually. That was my real discovery, was people don't hate us at all. They might not like some of our tactics, but they're a lot of people are very sympathetic to us. And it made me think, actually, the only people frightened by the right-wing press are us, because we believe it and we think that people don't like us. And I simply don't believe that. I think the right-wing press, they've only frightened us. They haven't frightened anybody else. In fact, of course, for most working class areas, the right-wing press doesn't even get there. So I thought that was another revelation for me. So once you've had the conversation about what they think about us, I then say, okay, I'd love to talk to you more, because this is the end of the survey. We've ended the survey. So, I didn't want to express any views up to now. If you would like me to, I could explain to you why it is that we sit on motorways, why it is that we're disruptive. And I could explain to you, let's say you've mentioned about ambulances not getting through. I could explain to you what our policy is on emergency services, because you might not realize that we actually have a blue lights policy, which is to let these ambulances through. And the only reason you think we don't do it is because you keep being told we don't do it, but it's certainly not true. So you can then have a really good discussion. And that leads you, so the survey is over at this point, and that leads you to the next point, which is, we are going to have a talk or a meeting or a get together or a discussion, whatever it is that you've decided to do. And it's going to be next Tuesday at the local hall. And really important that it's at the most local hall you can get hold of, because you want people to be able to walk there or catch the bus there and not to be out of their way. And it would be really great if you could come. We'd love to hear your views at that meeting. If you'd like to come and share your experience with us. So do please come. And would you like to come? And if they say yes, that's fine. You can record the fact they'd want to come. And if they say, oh no, I can't because I've got to put the children to bed, you can say, well, that's fine, because actually, if you'd like to keep in touch with us, I can sign you up now so that you get our newsletters. And you can always unsubscribe if you want to. And if they say, yes, I will come to the meeting next week, you can still say, would you like to join us as well now? And then we can send you information before the meeting. So there are different ways of signing up at that point. And I think it's certainly what I learned from Exeter's experience is that probably the best place to sign up is on the doorstep to sign up new recruits. And the next best place is at the talk. And our experience has been that the people who come to the talk will generally sign up. I mean, it's sometimes 100%, but it's not always 100%. Sometimes it might be 60 or 70%, but it's very likely that people will sign up at the talk. And that's what I found in the talks that I've done, and I know that other people have found the same thing. So that kind of takes us through to the talk itself. And I mean, there are lots of discussions which we're having right at this moment about the kind of rebel pathways. Like, what's the best thing to do next? Is it best to get them into an affinity group or join in some of the local activities of the local group, or into actions, or into 3.5, you know, encourage them to go out, join a door knocking team. And all of these things are possibilities. And we've got this weekend coming up, this coming weekend, where, I mean, there might be one or two of you going to it, actually. It'd be brilliant if you are, in Worcester, which is closer to you than to us. And we're going to be talking about all these things at the weekend. And maybe after the weekend, of course, we'll have a kind of firmer view about the different pathways that we can take. There's a whole lot of process stuff, which I'm not going to go into now. I don't think there's really any need to, except to say that the data collection from the door knocking and the talks and the leafleting and the stalls, actually I ought to add them in, the data collection from them is really, really important for us. So we haven't got it exactly right in the first 3 months, this initial phase. It's been a bit hand to mouth, but I'm hoping that probably after this weekend, we will have simplified the process so we can capture data really accurately for you in your local group. So I'm not sure, is your local group the whole of Mid Wales? I mean, that's an enormous area, but, sorry, yes, Dave.
Yeah, so we've got a few local groups represented here.
Right.
There are probably about 5 or 6 in Mid Wales, and a few more rural ones in North and South Wales as well.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's say that's brilliant. That's really good information. So, you know, you've got 4 or 5. Let's say you've got 5 local groups. What we want to make sure is that each of those local groups can have the data that we've collected available to you to use in order to contact and develop the skills of the recruits and move them along the pathway. Because in the end, you know, we want as many activists as we can possibly get hold of. And people often will start being quite nervous about where they're going. I mean, we all know this about recruits. And in fact, I remember when I first started thinking, I don't know what am I letting myself in for here. But actually within a few days, because the welcome was so embracing, within a few days, I was really keen to get going and do the NVDA and get on with everything else. And so the data that we can collect, we need you to have access to that data, and accurate data rather than just general data. And that will be what's going to happen. And of course, the idea is to build and build and build this. So the next stage is, of course, in September, and the next rebellion, and onwards from there, because we need large numbers of people, large numbers of recruits, large numbers of rebels. So I'm going to end there because I think I've said quite enough. In fact, I definitely said quite enough. So shall we pass? Can I pass back to you, Dave?